Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Trader Talk with our friend Charting Man Dan. Today we want to talk about human psychology and how that's reflected in the charts, not just in crypto but in different sectors, Dan, because we're seeing a lot of overlap or history repeating. So what are you noticing at the moment?
Well, it always fascinates me, psychology. I mean, that's part of the reason that I love trading. And what we saw in crypto is happening in the Canadian MJ space. The same crazy run up, crazy valuations, overhype, over emotion. And then we hit the top and we are pulling back 50% now on these major names. And on the way up, everybody was saying this is different than cryptocurrency. We have real companies with revenue, they're tangible. Crypto is intangible. It was a bubble, but I'm getting the exact same messages 6 months ago that I got in crypto from the people that were hurting on the way down. I'm getting those messages from people in the Canadian MJ space. And it's just such a similarity. And it really, causes me to think back and say, wow, technical analysis, Japanese candlesticks, they've been around for over 200 years at this point. And it shows you that human psychology and emotions are the consistent here. They're the thing that we see every decade, every century that goes by. That's what we are watching on these charts, and it's playing out the exact same way.
And it's funny that whether you use Fibonacci's or Elliott wave or just candlesticks or patterns, whatever you're using, that human psychology still comes through. And sometimes it can be news, and we look to that news and say that's why it went down, but it was at a technical level. It's, what came first, the chicken or the egg? But it's certainly those big cycles, and we've seen this in the past. I know in Australia we had this huge euphoria around lithium stocks and Chinese battery cars. It was going to be the revolution, and you get the emails in your inbox from these same investors that then went onto crypto that are now onto marijuana stocks, the dot-com bubble in the past. And I was talking in the pre-interview about the price of Amazon, how it goes up 100x and then comes all the way back down, and then it still does 100x in the future. And I definitely think that's something similar to what we're seeing, where the big boys miss out or they didn't have the on-ramps to get in, and they know the retail investor will capitulate and they want to scoop up Bitcoin at these lows before they let it run. And that's where I think we're at the moment.
Absolutely. I mean, the big boys, as you refer to them, and as I refer to them as well, they know this game. And I have been fortunate enough to learn my lessons early on. 6 years ago, I learned my lessons. I held, I didn't sell, I took big losses, I gave back all my gains. And so they've obviously learned at this point as well. And they're taking advantage of the massive shifts in psychology and emotion that the average retail trader, a ton of people joined the cryptocurrency movement and the excitement, having never done anything like that before. And Canadian marijuana stocks the same. It's attracting a different kind of investor. It's not attracting someone who's been investing in Apple and trading, tech stocks. It's investing a completely new person who does not know how the markets work, and they're taking advantage of it. And you're just seeing, again, the same cycle play out.
And talk about shorting a little bit, because if the big boys or even the whales, we've seen they have increased their Bitcoin holdings by 80%, the top 100 addresses, since the start of this year. So even though they might not have got in, if we're talking about the Wall Street side of things, if they have shorted from anywhere above 10,000, they have made a lot of money on the way down. And now they're layering in all those profits to make money again from the way up. So even though they missed out on the entire bull run of 2017, they are now sitting on bigger gains than the retail investor that rode the wave up and back down and didn't do anything. And that's how this game's played, because they know how to short.
Oh, absolutely. And it's easy for people at this point to be sick of the cryptocurrency space and to dismiss the hodlers and say, oh, it's never going to go back to those levels. But in reality, regardless of the technology, you could tell me that Bitcoin is broken, it's not going to work anymore, and I would tell you that it's still going to be run again. You better believe it's going to be loaded up. There's going to be a sentiment shift, and it's going to run again. Whether it runs back to all-time highs or not, I have no idea. But there is money to be made on the way back up, and that will happen. And same thing with Canadian MJ stocks. Those are going to hit a bottom. It's going to be the maximum amount of despair. We're never going to get back to those valuations for years and years. And it's going to be a pendulum swing really quickly, and it's going to shift back again. And we're also watching the US stock market right now, the S&P 500, because it's been all euphoria for 8 years since the 2008 collapse, or 10 years since that collapse. And so now we're watching, is that pendulum going to start shifting in towards fear and despair? And that's something that we need to be prepared for. Perhaps 2019, 2020, that's something that we see happen in these markets.
Yeah, and when the whole market comes down or sentiment gets really bad, that is another reason for the correlations to sort of occur and drag everything down with it. And maybe we're seeing that now in the S&P 500. I might let you touch on that, but who would have thought that after Amazon went all the way up to $110 and went down 96%, that it would ever get back to its all-time highs? And yet it surpassed those by 10x, and it ran over 100x. So that's similar to Bitcoin. If it goes down 90% or even gets down to $1,000, going to $100,000 in the coming years. And I think that is definitely on the cards. And nobody would think that now. It doesn't feel like that's ever going to happen. All the hodlers that got in high are kicking themselves. But I think long term, I'm still so bullish.
Yeah, time can heal all wounds and make people forget very quickly. And you give a good example as far as Amazon and a lot of these other stocks go. It took a long time. It took years and years to recover significantly, but it did happen. And it was just a sentiment shift. And that's something that we're always watching for. What's sentiment? And you can monitor it with different groups, different social media groups, and just the overall sentiment. And you and I have this glimpse where we have YouTube analytics. We can see what people are commenting on our videos, and we get this, sense of market sentiment that perhaps the average Joe doesn't have. And it's just fascinating to watch that switch happen. And the saying that the night is darkest before the dawn. The switch happens right after it seems like it's the least likely to happen. And I'm just patiently waiting. I'm still keeping capital around allocated to cryptocurrency when the bulls show back up, and I'm not touching that money and moving it, to stocks. I've definitely done that already with significant amounts, but I have this amount set and saying, all right, when the bulls show up, because I know they will show up in the cryptocurrency space again, I'm patiently waiting and I will capitalize on it. And it's just a waiting game at this point.
Yeah, I've got my last bit of capital that I'm only allowed to deploy if we get a clear low or a big capitulation in $1,000 bounce and V-shaped recovery, and you can go, okay, that's pretty clear that was the bottom. Because the other scenario is that we just drift along here at 3,000 and everyone's waiting for that capitulation and it doesn't happen, and it's more of a grounded out, rounded bottom. And do you see that as a possibility in step with the psychology that we're talking about, where everyone wants that relief, but we don't quite ever get it, and it's not for months later that we go, oh, geez, that was the bottom, now we've rounded out?
It's definitely possible that way. And again, I keep going back to the Canadian marijuana stocks, but back in the summer of 2017, we had our initial hype, and then we started consolidating where we said, all right, now we have to wait a certain amount of time until sales actually go live. So we had the vote passed. We know it's coming, but we got to wait 1.5 years, 2 years for the doors to open up and for revenue to come in. And we could see it was a slow bottom. And we watched the weekly trend change and we said, all right, now we can start establishing long-term positions. And it worked out very well by being patient and waiting for that. So it's not necessarily going to be a capitulation bottom. It's certainly something to watch out for, but it's not required.
And in terms of the stock market, I know we had Chairman Powell come out and say, oh, maybe we're not going to raise interest rates as fast as we thought, and that rescued the market on Friday, and now we're seeing fears again. What are you seeing on the charts there, Dan?
It's a joke. It's a game of such grand proportions where these tweets from Trump and these little headlines are moving things so significantly, and it's wild to watch. I can just watch the chart. We can all watch the chart and say, oh, someone just tweeted, news just came out, because we see the algos and the bots scramble to try and read the keywords and react to it. And it's almost comical at this point because it's happening so often. But we're in a weekly equilibrium on the S&P 500, and that's going to dictate the direction of momentum heading into 2019 when that breaks, which will be sometime in the next 3 or 4 weeks. And that's what we're watching for a pretty significant short to midterm indicator on where the S&P 500 is headed.
And taking a really macro view, things have been bullish for years or decades in terms of lowering interest rates, and now we've had this big money printing for the first time in history. Do you have any thoughts on somewhere like Japan that kind of went down this monetary experiment decades before everyone else, and they've just kind of been bottom bouncing? Do you think everyone thinks that stocks will only ever go up over the long term? Housing will only ever go up, and the reality is we might actually have an equilibrium where things go sideways for a number of years?
Yeah, it's definitely possible. And it's the kind of thing where I have a really hard time trusting the financial institutions and the government in terms of, I look back historically. My dad, his investing style through his working career is put money away. The money goes up, the market goes up, no matter what. It's just the way it works. And you look back historically, and that's true. That is the truth. But I still cannot trust that with my money, just to let it sit for decades and trust that it's just going to keep going up. That's too much of a stretch for me. So I'm always protecting against the possibility that that does not happen. Maybe I'm going to miss out some gains on the way up, but I'm not going to give anything back if we do go down, and potentially going to capitalize on if it goes down by playing bearish. So definitely not letting history lull me into a sense of complacency. I want to be able to react to what's happening here and now, because we're going to potentially, the way that technology is moving and how fast the world is moving these days, we're going to see things we've never seen before in the next decade. And we need to be as agile with our funds. Are we going to put it into crypto? Are we going to put it into something else, something new that we have no idea what it's going to be in 3 years from now? We have to be able to be agile to respond to the changing world around us.
Fantastic. I think that's a good place to wrap it up, unless you have any other thoughts for people at home, Dan, that are trying to get through a tough time for their crypto accounts.
Patience. It's always patience. It can always go lower than you think it can. And like you and I with our capital that we're waiting, there's no rush. Like I said, with Canadian marijuana stocks, when that rounded bottom on the weekly time frame happened, it was not the low. The low was 30-40% lower. We bounced 30-40%, then we slowly changed that trend, and we were still able to capitalize on hundreds of percent to the upside. So you don't need to time the bottom. You can be patient.
I think that's where dollar cost averaging is so important, and avoiding margin trading and trying to pick that exact bottom can really hurt you. Cool.
All right.
Thanks for tuning in, guys. I hope you've enjoyed that, and let us know other topics you want us to talk about in Trader Talk in the future. So cheers, Dan.
See you next time.
Cheers.